There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
And it doesn't say it here in Matthew, but in John's gospel, we're told that Pilate brings Jesus out one more time, and he appeals to the pity of the Jews. And Pilate says, "Behold the man." But it made absolutely no difference because they had no pity. People aren't changed by Jesus by having pity for him. And Pilate, you have to realize, he's actually being played by the Jews here. And the Jews here, they know exactly what buttons to push. They say to Pilate, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." And you have to remember, Pilate, he had the authority to release Jesus, but he couldn't now. He didn't. He condemned him. And you think, well, okay, here's Pilate, and he's judging Jesus. But the reality is that Pilate here, he's being judged by what he does with Jesus, because Pilate never had to condemn Jesus. Pilate, he had a choice. He had to choose, but he cared more about his position as a governor than the truth. And I believe he really believed Jesus was God, and he also believed Jesus was innocent, because there had never been any condemned prisoner that had ever stood before Pilate that didn't beg for his life. No one that didn't defend themselves against these kind of accusations. Pilate was not predestined to condemn Jesus to death. And you have to ask yourself, well, what more could God have done to warn him? Pilate knew what he was doing was wrong. It's just like Judas, how Judas knew what he was doing was wrong. And just like Judas, Pilate did this all for nothing. Because in about 2 years after this event, Caesar will take away Pilate's position anyways. And then Caiaphas, the high priest that judged him, that same 2 years, Caiaphas, he'll commit suicide. So now you have Jesus, and he's being led, and it's at least by 4 Roman soldiers, and it's this 1 mile procession. And Jesus is carrying the patibulum, which is the cross beam of the cross. A whole cross would have weighed about 300 pounds. The cross beam would have weighed about 75 to 125 pounds. The upright part, the upright beam of the cross, that would have been permanently fixed at the location of the crucifixion. But Jesus here, he's too weak to carry the patibulum. In fact, in Mark's gospel, it says these words. It says, "And they bring him to Golgotha." And what they're doing is they're talking about Jesus, which is literally saying that the soldiers, they actually had to carry Jesus to Golgotha, that they had to bear him because he was too weak to walk. All right, so now imagine that you're a Jew and you're living among a large population of Jews in northern Africa, in Cyrene, Africa, and you've been saving up for a long time, and you travel the 800 miles that you have to travel to go celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. And now you see all this commotion, and you don't know what's going on because you're a stranger, and you're just watching, and you kind of stand out just a little bit because you look like a foreigner, because you're wearing maybe different kind of clothes. And then all of a sudden, a Roman soldier comes up, and he places the end of his spear on your shoulder. And he doesn't ask you, but he commands you, and he tells you right there that you're going to pick up that beam and you're going to carry it, because a Roman soldier could command anybody to carry a burden for 1 mile. And so here you are, you're in your best clothes, and you're picking up this dirty, bloodied piece of wood, and it's a beam. And now you're having to follow this man who's been beat to a pulp, and he doesn't even look like a man anymore. He's being carried by 4 soldiers. And this man, he's being cursed and spit on by the whole crowd. This is the most hated man in the whole world. And you're being identified with him as if you're with him, as if you support him. But this wasn't by chance. God had brought this North African Jew to share in Jesus' humiliation, because this experience, it changes everything in Simon's life. Because Simon, through this, he heard all the words of Jesus, and he comes to a saving knowledge of who Jesus really is, and he gets saved. And the reason we know this is because both of his boys are known by the early church, and they're named by name in not only the Gospel of Mark, but also in Romans 16:13. They were Rufus and Alexander's, and they're called Simon's sons. And so now they're all on this procession, and they're on this procession to Golgotha, to the place of the skull, where there's this image of a skull that's cut into the rocks. And it's still visible today, and it's above the Arab bus station, and we call it Gordon's Calvary. Now, this happens to be the highest point outside of the city walls of Jerusalem. And they purposely took the busiest route that would be crowded with people, because they want to draw their attention to the prisoner, because this is a deterrent to all the citizens. This is to show people, this is your fate if you would dare to defy Rome. And at this time, there would have been over 2 million people in Jerusalem for the Passover. And so you have people from all over the world watching this. And Jesus, he would have had this placard around his neck, and it would have his official name on it, Jesus of Nazareth. And then it would have his official criminal charges, the King of the Jews. And that placard would be taken from around his neck, and it would be nailed above his head on the cross for everyone to see. And that charge would be written in all the 3 major languages. It would be written in Latin, in Greek, and Hebrew. And then the Roman soldiers, they tried to give Jesus vinegar with gall to drink prior to piercing his hands with those nails, because that gall would act as a narcotic, and it would numb the pain. But that gall also made that wine bitter. It made the wine undrinkable. And Jesus, he refuses to drink it, because he's not going to relieve himself from the whole wrath of God that's going to be laid upon him, the cup of the wrath of God. And then they strip Jesus naked, because that was part of the Roman humiliation. You're crucified naked. Then they stretch out his hands. They pierce him with these 6-inch nails. And then they place both of his legs sideways as if he's in a sitting position. And then they pierce both his feet with 1 nail right below the heel. And because crucifixion was so common, the gospel writers, they didn't have to describe it, because everybody knew what it was about. Everyone had seen it. And crucifixion was so cruel that a Roman citizen couldn't be crucified, only under extreme, extraordinary circumstances. Then after Jesus, he was raised upon the cross, the soldiers, they gambled for his clothes. And that's prophesied in Psalm 22. And if you go back and you read all of Psalm 22, the whole thing's about Jesus' crucifixion, and it goes into details of what he went through. And all of that was written 1,000 years before this event. And it was written centuries before there was ever any thought of crucifixion, because crucifixion was invented by the Persians, but crucifixion was perfected by Rome. And it was purposefully perfected, because what they wanted to do is they wanted to create the most painful way to kill a person. And that's where our word excruciating comes from. It comes from that word crucifixion. But the actual death that occurred from crucifixion, it could come from different sources. It could be from loss of blood, or it could come from shock or dehydration. You could have a heart attack, or you could have congestive heart failure. But the most common cause would be suffocation. But each death by crucifixion was different because it all depended on the person and the person's strength and the person's state of mind. We know that Jesus' cross was placed in the middle of Barabbas' partners. And everybody passing by him, they hurled abuse at Jesus because that was the only thing left that they could do to injure him. And the truth is it did hurt him because these are all the people that he came to save. But they don't understand that this cross is actually the ultimate display of God's true love for mankind. But we also see in the cross the display of mankind's actual deepest and darkest hatred for God and how much man they really do hate God. And you would have thought that the chief priests and the elders and the scribes, that they would have had enough because they had already plotted and they already had falsified evidence. They had already condemned him to death. You see them there still. They're still there. They're still mocking him. They're still abusing him. It says the scribes and the elders. So this is a very, very demonic, dark scene. And then they unknowingly admit that Jesus, that he saved others. They never said that during his ministry here. But here it says, he saved others, but he can't save himself. They never admitted that before. Now they're mocking him. They're mocking him to save himself. And they're telling him, if you do come down, well, then we'll believe in you. And then while they're telling him to come down from the cross, the robbers next to him, but they start mocking him too. So everybody's mocking Jesus. But we know from Luke's gospel that after spending the day with Jesus being crucified alongside him, that one of the other robbers had a change of heart. And he asked Jesus to remember him. And Jesus promised to him paradise with him that very day because Jesus looks at people and their needs, no matter what he's going through. Now we're told about this darkness that came at the 6th hour and that it lasts to the 9th hour, which is saying that this darkness came from 12 noon to 3 p.m. Jesus' total crucifixion lasted for 6 hours. It began at 9 o'clock in the morning. So here you have Jesus, and he's hanging there in the daylight for 3 hours from 9 till noon. Everybody could see it was Jesus, and everybody could see him hanging there. And then it was like night. And it wasn't a darkness like there was just dark clouds overhead. And it couldn't have been just a regular eclipse of the sun because it's impossible to have an eclipse of the sun during the period of a full moon. And Passover is always on a full moon. So this is an unusual darkness. And this time period was also written about by the Roman historian Phlegon. And he wrote, in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, there was an extraordinary eclipse of the sun at the 6th hour. The day turned into dark night.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.